The term government-sponsored enterprise, GSE, is often applied to so-called private enterprises that have been founded by the government and still enjoy public support of one kind or another, such as the American Association of Retired Persons, AARP, which ostensibly exists to influence government, although it has become in effect a large business conglomerate aided and assisted by government. You know, Adam, when I turned 50 and I started getting the AARP mailing, I was like so depressed that day when it showed up in my mail. I'm like, Christ, I'm old.
Dude, 15% off at Denny's. Hello and welcome to Haman Nature. I am Adam Haman, and I'm joined by my friend Tyrone, the porcupine hobo. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Crony. What up, Crony?
What up, my crony? Using language like that is a sure indicator that, oh joy, listeners and viewers, we're going to once again dive into Hunter Lewis's economics in not one, not two, but three lessons, which looks like this if you go out and purchase it. But I have a better way to show it to you. It's a purchase page on the Mises Institute website, Mises.org. Yeah, looks like
that's
that.
where we would recommend anybody that wants to purchase a copy, go on over there and pick up a copy. It's a real good book.
Highly recommended. All right. This is episode number 5, Tyrone, if I'm counting correctly. And we're going to do chapters 13 and 14, yeah?
Chapters 13 and 14, yeah. So we continue on with the third of the 3 economic lessons. And if you haven't watched the other episodes, you're missing out, folks.
You really are.
These episodes are highly in demand.
As you intimated at the beginning with the yo, my crony, we're talking about crony capitalism.
All right. Yep. So chapter 13 is the Crony Capitalist Conundrum. So previous chapters have already talked about crony capitalism quite a bit. And now we're exploring something to do with a conundrum. Let's see what that's about. It's probably wrapped inside a riddle, inside an enigma.
And covered by an alliteration.
All right. Here we go. Economic textbooks refer somewhat misleadingly to public and private sectors. Before the rapid expansion of the federal government by the George W. Bush and Obama administrations, the public sector, including federal, state, and local, was thought to represent about a third of the economy. The nonprofit sector, often overlooked, accounted for another 10%. This math suggested that just a bit over half of the economy was private for profit. But taking into account companies that are directly or indirectly controlled by government, at least 2/3 of the economy is really in the government sphere. So, Adam, I'm going to just pause right there because coincidentally, that goes right back to a recent episode we did where we were sort of critiquing something Dave Smith had said on his podcast about drawing lines in the sand. You know, how do you define the regime? What is the difference between private and public and government? And, you know, is there a clear dividing line? And so we talked about that a lot in that episode. And just so happens Hunter Lewis seems to be getting into his distinction where that line might be drawn in this chapter. So I'm excited to see what he has to say here. All right, so he continues, the term government-sponsored enterprise, GSE, is often applied to so-called private enterprises that have been founded by the government and still enjoy public support of one kind or another. Preeminent examples include the mortgage giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It is appropriate, however, to apply the term GSE more broadly to include the defense industry, sells mostly to the government, healthcare, drugs, housing, banking, finance, agriculture, food, autos, broadcasting, railroads, trucking, airlines, education, closely regulated, subsidized, price-supported, protected, or cartelized by governments. Law and accounting, expanded through government regulation and allowed to earn enormous fees in areas such as medical malpractice law. Unions, exempted from antitrust law and favored in many other ways. Other niche organizations, such as the American Association of Retired Persons, AARP, which ostensibly exists to influence government, although it has become in effect a large business conglomerate aided and assisted by government. You know, Adam, when I turned 50 and I started getting the AARP mailing, I was like so depressed that day when it showed up in my mail. I'm like, Christ, I'm old.
Dude, 15% off at Denny's. Yay. Before we move on,
Yeah.
I'm surprised you didn't mention tax accountants along with law and accounting and medical malpractice, because that's a huge sector that doesn't exist if you don't pay taxes. And before he even got to GSEs, he sort of blew past nonprofits, which just seemed like a goofy thing. I mean, how do you feel about nonprofits? I don't think they are real. I mean, you just take any profit you get and either expense it or pay it out to employees. I mean,
Yeah,
who cares? What's the distinction we're making?
Right. Yeah, that is a good conundrum, as the chapter would suggest. Yeah, I've always felt weird about nonprofits too. You know, in a way, I kind of like that there's this loophole, if you will, for someone to get out of paying taxes. Because anytime you can get out of paying taxes, that's great.
Sure.
So I think of things like churches, right? I think they're probably mostly classified as nonprofits. So to me, that's fine. But it does seem like a lot of the nonprofits out there are just kind of scams.
Scams, yeah. And it goes to show the distortion. Like, if you didn't have to pay these stupid taxes, then you wouldn't have to create these fictions like nonprofit organizations and whatever a GSE mixture is. It just goes to show this creepy parasitical Godzilla that goes through our economy where it should just be normal. Yeah, we exchange, we make money, blah, blah, blah. We invest, we get rich, we thrive. But no, it turns into this weird shell game where we're all trying to duck and claw and avoid getting smashed by Godzilla or parasitized. It's just, it's gross.
Yeah. All right, so Hunter continues, it is clear enough why all these quote-unquote private firms and organizations reach out and try to ally themselves with public officials. What special interests want from government? So now he has a section, it's just sort of like a bullet point list of what special interests want from government. They want sales, favorable regulations, exemption from regulation, regulation that discourages new or small competitors, access to credit, access to cheap credit, loan guarantees, monopoly status, extension of monopoly status, patents and copyrights, non-competitive bidding on or contracts, subsidies, bailouts, promise of a future bailout, which reduces current cost of credit, protection from competitors, domestic or foreign, favorable price restrictions, targeted tax breaks. There is a quid pro quo for all of this, of course. And what is that? And then he has another section, what public officials want from private interests. So it goes both ways. And that list includes campaign contributions, direct campaign assistance, indirect campaign assistance, assistance with messaging, money, illegal if a bribe, but not necessarily in other cases. For example, assistance with a loan or access to a sweetheart investment.
Or a book deal.
Or a book deal, yep. Support from quote-unquote foundations related to campaign contributors. Regulatory fees to support agency jobs. Jobs for friends, constituents, or eventually themselves. Travel, entertainment, other freebies. Power, control, and deference. After the 2008 crash, commentator Michael Barone noted that many people expected U.S. voters to turn against big business and market solutions in favor of more big government. But it is difficult to draw such distinctions when big business, big finance, big labor, big law, and big government all merge together into a single conglomerated entity, one that seems devoted to its own welfare rather than the public good. That
Yeah,
ends
that's
short chapter 13.
That's a great closing paragraph of that chapter. And then you go back and look at the bullet points of all the special interests or desires from government and what the officials want in return. And it's an enormous list. And we've mentioned this before, probably will every episode, but it is so galling when leftists or Marxists look at, 2025 America and go, gosh darn that capitalism.
Yeah.
This is why we can't have free markets. And the markets are not free at all.
Right.
And studying economics, we know to make a clear distinction between government action and private action. One is legitimate in that it faces the market test. You either are using these scarce resources to benefit consumers in a free exchange, or you're not, and you lose. You have economic losses if you do the second thing. And government is just thrashing around, stealing and bossing and killing. And it's all entwined. And when the government entwines itself into everything, what use is that public-private distinction? And there's a name for that, where you've got this nominal private property system where people, citizens, own companies, but the government is heavily involved. And that has an economic name. It's called fascism, or corporatism, or crony capitalism, or something like that. And boy, oh boy, do we have that now. Yeah. I mean, the Don, the great mob boss, just got the government, in bed with Intel and Pfizer. What in the hell is that? With a 10% stake? Capitalism, Tyrone.
Mm-hmm.
So...
All right, so now we'll continue with chapter 14, which is titled The Progressive Paradox. So we had a Crony Capitalism Conundrum, and now we have a progressive paradox.
Still alliteration, so it must be
I
true.
love it. Oh, yeah, it must be. That's right. Okay. This one's wrapped in a Pandora's necklace. No. In the prior chapters, we noted that more government, and especially more government of the economy, produces the unintended consequences of more crony capitalism. This is an especially troublesome point for political progressives who see more and bigger government as a way to control greedy private interests. Senator Bernie Sanders, candidate for the Democratic Party presidential nomination in 2016, claimed in his speeches that, quote, I am a proud progressive, prepared to stand with the working families of this country, prepared to take on powerful special interests which wield enormous power over the economic and political life of this country. Unquote. What are we to make of this? Progressivism is a political movement began with one simple idea. Special interests comprised of rich people and corporations had too much power and were using it to the detriment of ordinary people. Progressives would deploy the power of government to regulate and quell these special interests. But there was a logical problem. The more government intervened in the economy, the more special interests sought to infiltrate government, which became increasingly corrupted. Columnist George Will summarizes what might be called the progressive paradox as follows. Quote, progressives have a rendezvous with regret. That's nice. I like that. Their largest achievement is today's redistributionist government. But such government is inherently regressive. It tends to distribute power and money to the strong, including itself. Government becomes big by having big ambitions for supplanting markets as society's primary allocator of wealth and opportunity. Therefore, it becomes a magnet for factions muscular enough, in money or numbers or both, to bend government to their advantage. Unquote. Any immediate thoughts?
Yeah, it's pernicious. I mean, you could imagine a citizenry noticing that it's not that big corporations and private interests are using their own market power to screw over the citizenry. They're using the government. So you could imagine enlightened citizens getting together in a voting bloc to stop all that and reduce the power of government such that the big interests are all they can do is offer you a deal and you're free to accept it or reject it. But it's almost like there was a controlled opposition in the leftist movement that instead of doing that, reducing the power of government, they decided to make it bigger in order to distribute goodies to the peasants. And the rich and powerful would know, obviously, that since you haven't diminished the scope of government, great. It's still there to use as an instrument of larceny. And it just seems like such an obvious mistake that I can't help but thinking that progressives were just led into it like a trap. What say you?
Yeah, the progressive label is an interesting one because obviously it goes back to Teddy Roosevelt, the late 1800s, and I think back then it's a little bit of a different meaning than it does today. But ultimately, they just want big government. They just want powerful government control, and so I think it was just whatever their reasoning was. For Roosevelt, it was about world domination, and for Bernie Sanders, it's about redistribution of the economy. But I mean, it doesn't really matter, I guess. If you wield all the power, you're going to you're going to get corrupted one way or the other, I think.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, but they sold it to the public. There's always, what the leaders intended for their own, in their own head, but they sold it to the public as busting these trusts who have too much power. But what power did they have? They were using the government to fund all their operations. I mean, that's how we got a transcontinental railroad and a bunch of these other crony things. So,
yeah, I mean, if you want to think of like an analogy or something, let's say that I want an analogy where the only thing I can think of is that. Let's say you have this big, powerful river flowing through. It's very powerful. Well, in order to stop the river, in order to dam it up, let's just say, to fight that power, you need something more powerful than the river. You need heavy equipment and machinery and all this huge amounts of power to stop this other powerful thing. But So that's what the government is saying. Okay, these things are too big and powerful. So in order to break it up, we're going to have to become bigger and more powerful. So to them, the issue, to a progressive, the evil is not power. The evil is how power is used. I think that's really what it comes down to for progressives. They see the world. I just had this conversation with somebody else. They see the entire world as just a power struggle. That's all they see it as. They don't really see the possibility of people just cooperating with each other. Nope. Wherever there's two people, there's a relationship of power. Somebody has more power than the other one. And to me, that's just a ridiculous dichotomy or framework to view the world in. So for a progressive, it's just about power.
I think I think that's actually projection. It's an admission. Mm-hmm. I think what the progressive is experiencing internally, in essence, is envy.
Oh, yeah.
And they see a disparity in power because what they really want to do, because they're envious, is use power to make things equitable because they're envious. I mean, I think at its root, it's just a license to steal, a moral license to steal. And then that's why the arguments for it just kind of don't make any sense. Well, yeah, but if you're worried about being predated upon, why are you making a bigger government for these companies to use? But they don't want to hear any of that. What they really want is to exercise power, as you said. Right. And I think that's what we're dealing with.
And power corrupts.
Always.
All right. The 15th to 16th century Dutch philosopher and reformer Erasmus wrote that, quote, "A city grows rich through the industry of its citizens only to be plundered by the greed of princes," unquote. This was not a complete account. When government plunders, it usually does so in alliance with powerful private interests, which may include prominent citizens, or in a democracy, strategic voter blocs, including voter blocs assembled on cultural as well as on economic grounds. How then can government be expected to restrain the special interests with which it is closely allied? The more government runs the economy, the more private interests will insinuate themselves into politics and vice versa. Money and power will flow back and forth through ever more corrupted channels. Average citizens will always end up getting the short end of the stick, as they did during and after the crash of 2008. Progressive thinkers deal with this paradox in strikingly different ways. Some simply deny the problem. The Economist magazine, itself generally progressive, criticized leading progressive and Keynesian economist Joseph Stiglitz for taking the easy tack of denial. Quote, "After Stiglitz has condemned today's policymakers so roundly as incompetent and beholden to special interests, his prescription for better regulation and his broader faith in government activism sounds perverse. If policymakers failed as miserably as Mr. Stiglitz believes, then he ought to be far more worried about the potential for government failure in the future. That dissonance is a glaring weakness in Mr. Stiglitz's position," unquote. Economist Brian Kaplan, discussing a book about crony capitalism by the Marxist historian Gabriel Kolko, similarly remarked that, quote, "Strange as it seems, Kolko sees the unholy alliance of business and government as an argument for government," unquote. That's interesting. Progressive economist Jeffrey Sachs at least acknowledges the paradox when he writes in his book, The Price of Civilization, that, quote, "Yes, the federal government is incompetent and corrupt, but we need more, not less of it," unquote.
Like I said, their arguments don't make any sense.
This prompted Congressman Paul Ryan to respond in a review that Sachs's position, quote, "would be comical if it were not deadly serious," unquote. Some progressives are troubled by the illogic of their position and recognize the need for change. After all, is not a desire for change at the heart of progressivism? Change and hope. Don't forget the hope. Is this not what the word is supposed to mean? Others have taken the opposite and again paradoxical stance of becoming reactionaries opposed to any change. Here is what Southern Methodist University health policy analyst John Goodman said about progressive voters after the 2012 presidential election. Quote, "If you are one of the folks who voted as a progressive in the last election, what did you vote for? Here are three things for starters. 1, no reform of the public schools, no reform of the welfare system, and no reform of labor market institutions that erect barriers between new entrants and good jobs. The first three policies you voted for mean that those on the bottom rung of the income ladder are not going to get a helping hand to get on a higher rung. As far as those with the least income and wealth are concerned, you voted for status quo all the way. And to rub salt in the wound, the very people you voted for will be telling the world at every opportunity how much they care about the poor, even as they do everything to impede their economic mobility! Exclamation point. Here are three more things you voted for. 1, no reform of the tax system. 2, no reform of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other entitlements. And 3, no serious effort to deal with mounting deficit spending and ever-increasing national debt. The second set of policies you voted for adds up to another bottom line. With respect to the nation's fiscal health, you voted again for status quo all the way. There's no mystery about the problem we face. We've promised more than we can afford. According to the Congressional Budget Office, if we continue on the path we are on, the federal government will need to collect 2/3 of the income of the middle class and more than 90% of the income of high-income families by mid-century, unquote. So I'll stop right there because I think that's exactly what they want. I don't know why he would be like objecting to progressives about this. I think progressives just want to tax 100%. Right?
That last part with taxes, but I do think if progressives actually listened to the first part of his little spiel there, they sure didn't think they were voting to ossify into poverty all these groups of people with their policies. They just were. They were sold a bill of goods. It's like that controlled opposition argument I was making earlier. The people who end up voting for these policies are just kind of getting hoodwinked by the people leading them, who know how the system works and are benefiting from it. Like, look at Bernie Sanders. He's one of the few leftist progressives who actually seems sincere, which means he's the one who looks the dumbest. like he actually thinks that these policies will make the poor better off, but I don't think the rest of these leftists think that at all. I think they're just telling lies to their constituents. Because otherwise, how would it make any sense? I don't know. And even where they agree that they want to tax 2/3 of the income of the middle class and more than 90% of the income of high-income families, well, most voters are just going to define themselves no matter what the truth is. They sure aren't the upper class. And I think most voters think that everybody who makes more than them is the middle class. I mean, there aren't any definitions here. No, the middle class. Because, you'd think that he just said that in order to make these things come true, we're going to have to tax 2/3 of the middle class. So I bet the people who vote for it are saying, oh, well, that's okay. That's not me. That's my next door neighbor who makes $60,000 more a year than I do. Heck, I'm not the middle class. I'm the underclass.
Right.
Surely I'm not going to get taxed this 2/3, right?
Right.
But they're being lied to.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know why this reminds me of a book. It's a really great sci-fi series called the Beggars series. I think it's in the first book, Beggars in Spain. It's by Nancy Kress. I would consider her libertarian leaning. Excellent author. Anyway, in this book, it's sort of a dystopian future, and yeah, the economy's gotten so bad, like the debt's so bad. Yeah, everybody's taxed at like 90%. So I mean, I think a lot of times fiction writers can predict things in the future a little bit better than all the pundits and experts and whatever.
That's a great point. And, lefties are always railing against capitalism for forcing poor people into subsistence living. They have to work or else they're going to starve, so that the evil boss only gives them enough food so that they can eat. Well, that never works out that way into free markets. It can't because of competition. But the system you just described with 90% taxation, on the face of it, you'd think, well, people wouldn't even bother getting out of bed to do anything if they're going to get taxed that much. But, they have to eat every day.
Right.
So now let's look at the system that really is exploiting people because they have to at least get subsistence. It's high taxes that does that, not free markets.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's an excellent point. Taxes or inflation that do that, right? Kind of have the same
corrupt the money or steal the money. Yeah.
Tom Woods had a great line that I use all the time. Especially when progressives break out that line, the rich got to pay their fair share type. That line, because they see the world. They look around and they say, wow, but look at how much poverty there is in the world, and however you want to define poverty, we don't need to have the same argument. Well, even the poor people in America are better off than the richest king was 1,000 years ago. Okay, well, I mean, there's some psychological ways you could look at that, not just materially speaking. But let's forget all that. Let's just say the progressives look around the world and say, wow, there's more poor people than there are rich people, right? And they're like, why is there so much poverty? This just seems wrong. And Tom Woods points out that's the wrong way to look at things. The question shouldn't be, why is there so much poverty in the world? The question should be, why is there so much wealth in the world? Because evolutionarily speaking, we all came out of the jungle or the cave or wherever, and we're all poor. We're all in poverty. It's the Earth's our natural default is for us to be poor. Like I'll often say, the Earth wants you to be poor. That's the way it. Otherwise, it would have evolved us to be rich. But no, it wants us to be poor. I mean, obviously, I'm kind of being joking there, but kind of making the point that, yeah, there's 8 billion people in the world right now. 50% live below the world economic poverty line, and that's terrible. But why is it not 100% people below the poverty line? How did 50% of the world's population get above the poverty? That's a question that they never ask because they don't understand where wealth comes from. Mm-hmm. I think it's just magic. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Like they live in this zero-sum game world where there must have been a pile of gold somewhere 100,000 years ago. One dude got it and has been distributing it to his friends and family or cronies ever since. And it's not fair because nobody else has been able to get a piece of the pie. But it's the opposite. It's wealth isn't found, it's created. So I think we've touched on that in a lot of different ways in other episodes. But
no, I think it's important because when people decry the inequality of civilization, I think in their mind they're contrasting it to some fantasy in which we all just walk around in abundance in paradise and pick fruit, and we all have the same idyllic lifestyle. But that's just a dumb cartoon you saw once, people. The actual state of nature, what Mother Earth gives us, is horrifying. Right. We are cold. We are starving. Right. We are beset on all sides by beast and disease and other men. It's insane. I mean, I think compared to the state of nature, every poor person on this planet is living a better life. I think, for sure in America. And so, the question is not why are people poor and what can we do about it? It's why in the world do we have anything? And let's figure out a way to get more of that.
Right. It's this Rousseauian, and it's really Rousseau that kind of came up with this Garden of Eden idea, and it's what every communist sort of believes, that the earth, on all these tree huggers, the earth is wonderful, and if we just lived in harmony with it, we'd never have to work, and we'd have everything taken care of. It's just, the furthest thing from the truth. And I often, to go to your point about how horribly deficient, dangerous, and dirty this planet is, as Alex Epstein would call it, I often make a joke, like if I was an alien species and I was, I needed to find a new home planet, so sent out scout ships to go scout for other planets that we could possibly move to, and I came along Earth, I'd take one look at it and keep going, say, fuck that piece of shit. Right? Like hurricanes, plagues, earthquakes, freezing cold temperatures. I mean, it's a disaster. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know why people love this planet so much. I can't wait to get off of it. Although I don't think I'll see that day, unfortunately. But I want to make one more final thing. I want to put button one more thing up. So the question is, where does wealth come from? So we're posing the question. We're saying, okay, progressives, poverty is bad. I agree with that. And you think somehow, if it weren't for greedy capitalists or whatever, everybody would have everything, I guess. And that for some reason, the capitalists are just hoarding it. But then we ask the question, where does the wealth come from? And to keep it very simple, and why I'm a capitalist, is because wealth only comes from capitalism. That's sort of the literal definition of capitalism. What is capitalism? It's in the word capital. Now, don't ask AOC, Because when she's asked what capitalism is, what was that goofy answer she gave in that one interview?
Capitalism isn't, to me, it's an ideology of capital. It means that we seek and prioritize profit and the accumulation of money above all else, and we seek it at any human and environmental cost. And to me, that ideology is not sustainable and cannot be redeemed.
Capital is stuff. So what's wealth? Wealth is a house. It's clothing. It's the production of food. It's creating stuff. Another word for stuff is capital. And what capitalism is about is creating stuff, so building that house, and then investing in it to preserve that wealth into the future. So all wealth in the world comes from capitalism, if you just take that as the simple definition of capitalism.
No, I think you're exactly right. If I were to try and make it even more simple, capitalism is that first step in increasing or decreasing your time preference. You've gotten yourself a little bit extra, a little bit above subsistence, or you've decided to, go lean for a little bit to accumulate a little bit above subsistence in capital, even if it's just food, so that you don't have to work every day to feed yourself. It's putting aside something you could have consumed today for the future for the purpose of investing. And that's the building block of all wealth.
All right, let's continue on here. The idea of progressives as reactionaries will be an affront to most progressives, but where the shoe fits, they will have to wear it. Nor is it the most searing indictment. An even more disturbing idea is that many progressives, like many late 20th century Soviet communists, have lost their faith and, behind a mask of superficial pieties, are mainly focusing on what side their bread is buttered. On anything from a small to a large scale, they have become crony capitalists themselves. People in this category include progressive teachers who mainly focus on getting higher pay, or who talk up a lottery for education, even though lotteries just take money away from those who have the least. Progressive union members fighting for benefits at the expense of usually poor non-union members, not to mention workers in other countries who may be desperately needy. Progressive seniors who do not mind being subsidized by young people who are on average the poorest group of all. Government workers who see themselves as serving their fellow citizens, especially those less advantaged, but who demand salaries, health insurance, and sometimes grossly inflated retirement benefits far in excess of what comparable workers in private industry earn and far beyond what taxes will support. To see how far progressivism has fallen, we need only consult what John Gunther wrote about progressivism in his book Inside USA, published in 1946. Quote, "The age of the Pleistocene marauders and despoilers has passed, is as dead as Tutankhamun. The permanent, durable groundswell is progressive. This is a country that believes in two things above all, progress and reform," unquote. But even Gunther worried about selling out to the big interests who were originally the opposition. And given the weaknesses of human nature and the imperfectibility of government officials, he had reason to worry. Today, the children of the confident and committed reformers may be talking the old progressive talk, but they seem to have found a comfortable spot in the crony capitalist system. They have traveled a long distance from what may have been the idealism of their youth, still mirrored in the young people who intensely protest against what they call capitalism, communicating through their iPhones, digging up information on the internet with iPads, or meeting up at Starbucks to recharge with very costly varieties of caffeine, all with little or no perceived irony, but at least with a still untainted sincerity. The essence of the problem with all these versions of progressivism was partly captured by investor and author Jim Rogers when he wrote that, quote, Governments are terrible at engendering prosperity and wealth, unquote. But it must be added that their efforts to create prosperity and wealth more often than not create corruption. And nothing is more deadly for sustained prosperity than corruption. However well-intentioned progressive ideas of government leading the economy may be, they always entail dismantling of the price system, and this will not work. By now, this should be clear enough. Endlessly repeating the errors of the recent past will just make things worse, much worse. Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau, President Franklin Roosevelt's close friend and heartfelt progressive, admitted in 1939 that government leadership of the economy had not rescued us from the Great Depression.
Shocking, shocking.
Prepare your thumbnail image clip, Adam. Quote, I want to see this country prosperous. I want to see people get enough to eat. We have never made good on our promises. I say after 8 years of this administration, we have just as much unemployment as when we started, and an enormous debt to boot, unquote. Walter Lippmann, another famous progressive who believed deeply in the promise of government economic leadership, finally agreed in 1943 that it tended to produce the opposite of what was intended. Quote, this is the vicious paradox of the gradual collectivism which has developed in Western society during the past 60 years. It has provoked the expectation of universal plenty provided by action of the state, while through almost every action undertaken or tolerated by the state, the production of wealth is restricted, unquote. The customary progressive response to Lippmann's plaintive observation is that we just need an even stronger dose of the same medicine. But this defies logic. Lippmann was reporting on 60 years of free price destruction. We have had almost 70 more years since. It is time to face reality and move on. Some progressives try to distract themselves and others from these economic failures by refocusing progressivism on cultural issues. But the economic issues cannot be avoided. Even if one espouses multiculturalism and diversity as currently defined by contemporary progressives along racial or gender lines rather than, for example, diversity of opinion, how can it be advanced in a failing and increasingly corrupt economy? Intellectual revolutions are always hard fought, and the fighting takes a long time to play out. Social and economic establishments are determined to preserve their privilege. At first, they mock their critics. Any argument for reform, however factual or logical, is greeted with derision. What a joke! You tell him, Hunter. Once it becomes clear that the other side is making its case and starting to gain a foothold with the voting public, mockery is succeeded by stony silence. Everything the critics say is now ignored, lest more people hear about it. In the next stage, the established elite finally acknowledges its critics and comes out battling, using every device at hand to try to destroy them. If this fails, and the critics finally win the battle of public opinion, the old elite simply say, "Oh, we knew that all along." Today, the progressive elites are feeling besieged. They are no longer just mocking their critics. They are finding it more and more difficult to ignore them. The third stage battle seems to have been joined, with the final result still to be seen. Thus ends chapter 14.
Yeah, it's a great chapter. I just don't know why can't we learn? Mm-hmm. We have example after example after example in history that big government is truly the war of all against all, with each person trying to use voting blocks to gain a concentrated advantage, benefits at the expense of everybody else, hoping that the costs will be distributed among the taxpayers and they won't notice somehow. I mean, the essence is the legal ability to steal always will lead to corruption. How could it not? And the obvious solution to just reduce the power of government to do this horrible thing is like the one thing people won't consider. It's confusing.
Yeah, your question was, why can't we ever seem to learn? And I actually think we are learning, but I've made this comment before that I think our species is very young. You know, at best, some estimations say we're about 200,000 years old. Okay, whoop-de-doo, that's nothing. So you might say, like, you know, why can't, you know, if a child keeps making the same mistake, you know, a few times, say this dang child just can't learn anything or something. I don't know, but you know, it's hard to learn. Well, it takes time to learn. So from a species point of view, I think we're very young. We're still in our infancy, you know, toddler years, maybe, or maybe a little bit older than that. But also why we can't learn just like in our current state, it's because I think we just don't live long enough. It's really what it comes down to. It's like, you know, why do the big wars always sort of happen 40 to 50 years apart from each other? It's because, you know, World War II didn't come 3 years after World War I, and it would never would have, because the people who fought World War I can remember and like, that sucked. I'm not doing that again, right? But our memories just aren't long enough. So I always felt like, you know, we live 70 years on average, kind of, right? That's just not long enough to learn. Like, each generation just has to learn the lessons over and over again for whatever reason. So I'm kind of hopeful that maybe one day, if we can extend our lifespan to say 200 to 300 years that we live, I think that would really make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely something to that. I've been trying to hold your hand and Bob Murphy's hand because you're both so black-pilled. I think you're going to jump off the roof. But when I get black-pilled, I start musing, maybe our problem is that we're just too stupid and we're not getting smarter. Like, intelligence and general awareness is, you know, always going to be distributed on some kind of a bell curve looking thing. Mm-hmm. And I fear that the smartest of us figure out that they'll do okay if they get into government and increase its power, because they're smart enough to, you know, play the game and expropriate wealth from the rest of us. And the people who don't want to do that seem to be the ones who are just munching grass in the field, like the herd waiting to be shorn.
There also does seem to be, though, I don't know if it's a decline or a lack of intelligence or intelligent people. What I mean by that is, you know, it's been a long time since Einstein came around. Has there been another Einstein lately?
Probably.
You know what I mean?
Probably. Like, Terrence Tao is pretty smart.
I guess I don't know who that is. But see what I mean? It's like,
it's a mathematician I wrote about. But actually,
are we still getting geniuses?
Yeah, we for sure are. The right end tail is still very, very long. We're getting geniuses. Most of them are going into tech, I think, which is fine. We need tech. And I'm going to spit out my own black pill. Am I? I'm going to change it at least. I don't think it's an intelligence thing. I think it's a moral clarity thing. We've lost the reason to think that stealing is wrong. And even back when our Western civilization held that as an important belief, it wasn't that most people figured out the moral philosophy behind why. It's just that they listened to the guy dressed in fancy robes at the front of the big building on Sundays, and he told him, and I believe it, and it's in the culture, and, you know, we sort of behave that way. Which means that we could decide to re-embrace an ethic that stealing is wrong. And once you actually believe that, everything government does is illegitimate. So maybe it's not we don't have to worry about geniuses. Maybe we just have to re-embrace a virtue, a value that's really old and easy to understand. And you can change the culture in all sorts of different ways. One real popular rapper or movie screenwriter or something could probably get us there. So be of good cheer. That sort of thing can happen in any moment.
Sounds good.
All right, man. Well, this was great. Part 5. I don't want you guys to worry. We're going to keep doing this until this bookie right here is done. And we're very close to getting to the examples rather than just the lessons, the case studies, if you will. That's where some meat is going to show up. Thank you, Tyrone, my spiky friend. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please go to HamanNature.com, Haman. Check out our Substack. 5 days a week, you either get a podcast like this or an article from my strange brain. People tell me those things are good. We will catch you next time on Haman Nature. You got anything else to say? As I already tied a bow on it.
Be seeing you.
Wise words. See you next time, guys.